Hello, everyone. Welcome back to DrDarnise's House of Religion, Magic, and Conjure. Good to have you back. In today's episode, I have maybe some surprising information for you about some historical figures who you do know, but you might not know how much of a mystic they were. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about people like Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Harriet Tubman. Now, you know who those people are, right? You know that Nat Turner led a slave revolt. Um, but did you know that Nat Turner was somebody who was considered to be a psychic, a medium, um, even from childhood? He was kind of a spiritual kid, and he was somewhat of a minister on his plantation. So you know the story of him. I mean, I'm thinking that you know the story of him as a person who was free. I mean, he escaped to freedom, and then he came back to get other people, and he planned this revolt, and started the revolt and everything, and killed a bunch of white people. Yeah, and then of course got caught and all that. We know that part of the story, but did you know about how he really, the motivation for him coming back to help free other black people, motivation for everything was really because of his ongoing kind of relationship with the spirit. He was what we would call a mystic, right? So he wasn't, I mean, he was somebody who was, very, very much familiar with the Bible as much as he could be, right? And looked to in a ministerial role by his community as a religious leader, but he was more of an experientialist, right? So that's a mystic, the one who communes with God, who meditates, who has a spiritual practice. And so Nat Turner was that person. And the reason I wanted to talk about these people in this way is because you know how I always feel we're not going to be erased. So these are people who are known to history, Nat Turner, but it's not necessarily known to history that he was a mystic and that that's what inspired him to go back and free black people. He was free, but he was hearing the voice of God or spirit tell him to go back. And so what led him to do what many people would say, well, that was brutal for him to go back and decide he had to kill white people, men, women, and children. It was brutal. Well, the slavery was brutal, right? And how could it be that God told him to do that? And so we look again at the Bible and we say, well, God tells people to do that sometimes, especially in the Old Testament. So Nat Turner was plugged into the divine in a certain kind of way that led his actions. The second one, Denmark Vesey, which, hopefully you know his name, but people tend to know less about Denmark Vesey than Nat Turner. Denmark Vesey was he was enslaved, but he bought his freedom in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina. And so he decided that he was going to free some other black people. He was going to stage an insurrection. And they got found out, though, in his case. And so that didn't really go off. It didn't really happen. But on his team, he brought in somebody by the name of Gullah Jack. How many of y'all know about Gullah Jack? You might know about the Gullah Geechee culture because sometimes I talk about that when I'm talking about my trips to Savannah and the Sea Islands and all that. And we talk about Gullah Geechee culture. Well, Gullah Jack was called that because supposedly Gullah refers to Angola. Angola in pidgin English becomes Gullah. And so this person, Gullah Jack, was revered as an African person, African man who still retained the old African ways. He still knew about African spirituality. He still knew about African practices, right? That now we're struggling to recover, right? Reclaim, to empower ourselves. But Gullah Jack was somebody who was known to still be really steeped into his African traditions and spirituality. And so Denmark Vesey, in establishing the team for the revolt, said, "I need Gullah Jack on the team because he will help us, be successful." He operated as sort of a shaman or a spiritual leader for Denmark Vesey and the team. Gullah Jack was somebody who was said to who he could not be personally harmed. He could not be contained. He could not be caught because he knew how to work the spirituality, what we might call magic. He knew how to work it. He knew how to put roots on people. He knew how to bind people. And so anyway, the point is that Denmark Vesey had Gullah Jack on the team. You might want to look up Gullah Jack. And then thirdly, it's Harriet Tubman. So I know you know her story, right? And you could easily go watch the movie if you haven't. And certainly if you have not seen the movie, I would suggest it. Some people had some misgivings about it, but that's the same way it is always, right? Nobody loves everything. So I'm just going to say this about Harriet Tubman, though, what you can see in the movie is that she was known to have what they call spells, right? She would fall out unconscious. She would have premonitions. She was maintaining a relationship with the divine, right? The God of her understanding. And so she felt that God would tell her where to go. God would tell her when it was time to go back and get some other black people from slavery. Right? They call her Grandma Moses. Go back and get my people out of slavery. And we know she was a little tiny woman, 4'11", pretty much by herself, going back down into the South after she had escaped, going back down into the South to get black people. How did she know where to go? How did she do it? Well, she says God told her. She would have a spell. She'd wake up. She'd wake up from a dream and know what to do, know which way to go, right? And so the other person I want to mention is George Washington Carver. And I know you might say, who? George Washington Carver? How does he fit? Well, did you know that in addition to being a farmer, right, an agriculturalist, right, he was brilliant as an agriculturalist. And I think, his history in 2020 is a little bit fuzzy for most people. Again, that's what I do when I do, because we shall not be erased on my watch, see? But even though we might know a little bit about him, we don't know of his mystical tradition. He was at Tuskegee with Booker T. Washington. Y'all remember Booker T. Washington started Tuskegee Institute and died in 1915. But before that, he had brought George Washington Carver because Carver was known to be this master agriculturalist. And Washington wanted Carver to come on and teach at Tuskegee. And so he did, and his brilliance was such that he seemed to be able to commune with nature. That's what I'm trying to get at. He seemed to be able to have a connection to nature, to plants and to trees. Nowadays people call it like a horse whisperer or a dog whisperer. People who can communicate with animals or communicate with nature in a way that most of us can't. And so I would say that about George Washington Carver. He was a nature whisperer. And he said, I just watched this documentary, just popped up at my YouTube, suggest letters, because he became really well known for his brilliance at this. People would write him letters and he would say, I don't know the answers to these things. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to have a nap. And when I wake up, I'll have the answer because God is going to tell me. Or he would go out, sit by a lake, sit by some body of water, sit under a tree. He said sometimes he would examine a plant, a flower, and he would get the answers. And he was also a painter. So he was really a Renaissance man. He was a painter and he had exhibits. He mostly painted plants and flowers. And he said, once you understand how a flower works, you know the secret to the whole universe. He was a scientist. He was a botanist, and he wanted to know how the thing worked. And so he would ask God, how does it grow? How does it work? And God would tell him. So then he could write people back and say, this is how this works. And whatever the problem was, he said he sat down, somebody had asked him about what to do with the peanuts. She had so many peanuts. She didn't know what to do with them all. So she wrote to him and said, what can I do with all these peanuts? And he came up with more than 100 uses for the peanut. So we know him as the person associated with peanut butter. That's why we have peanut butter, because George Washington Carver invented all these uses for the peanut. Well, He said he didn't know what to tell her. So he went out, sat in nature, communed with nature, a very mystical thing to do, right? Meaning you don't take your direction, your spiritual direction from dogma or doctrine or even a minister or a priest. You go out and you have direct relationship with God, with the universal spirit, with nature. That's what makes a mystic, somebody who wants and gets direct knowledge. And so he would say, he would just go, I don't know, what can I do with the peanut? And he got over 100 uses for the peanut because he asked God. And he said, I just know God is going to tell me what to do. And he was known to be a very humble person who immersed himself in his work. He didn't marry, didn't have children. He immersed himself in his work. And he had, just generations of students who came to Tuskegee. Those were his children. Those are the people he educated. And he left us a whole legacy of agricultural knowledge. And from where? He said it came from God. God just told me what to do and I did it. Like Harriet Tubman, God just told me where to go and I went. Like Nat Turner, who said, God told me to go and do this and told me how to do. Right? So I just wanted to share that with you all because it's not something that's commonly known about these people who we do know about, right? We typically hear about these people during Black History Month, right? If nothing else, during Black History Month. And, we grow up hearing about Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman at least. But when have you ever heard this aspect of their story? If you have, I'd be curious to know. Leave me a comment. I would definitely want to know. Where did you learn this? But again, on my watch, I just really want to chronicle these things. And so we know that this is a normal part of life to be connected to nature, to be connected to spirit, to cultivate our own spirituality. And you can do that very well through nature. You can look at my last video I posted about what is spirituality. The awareness that there's something greater than you and there's a way to interact with it. How do you interact? That's your spirituality. So for some people, it's through nature. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. I think I'm just going on and repeating myself now, but I think you get my drift. So leave me some comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you already knew that. And yeah, that's it for now. Join me on Patreon. Don't forget to go over there. Like, share, subscribe. I always appreciate it. And that's it. Bye for now.